Good Choices, a holistic conversation about dance, art, and life with Sabine Parzer. Hi, everybody. So, this is the Somatic solo podcast, Somatics and Applied Anatomy. And this is part 2 because I was talking so much the first time around. I decided to make a second podcast because there's more to say. Okay, so if you remember soma as the basis for somatics and the field of somatics, as it was coined by Thomas Hanna. And I think I want to start talking about these pioneers in the field. So one of the things that we have to note is a historical timeline, which is very interesting, that around the turn of the century, from the 1800s to the 19th century, to the 20th century, so late 1800, blah, 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 into 19 something, there were these pioneers that were kind of researching on the artistic field, and some of the early pioneers on the somatic field. And they were not necessarily overlapping at the time, but I find it a very interesting sort of historical coincidence that so much information, so much was bubbling up around that time. Of course, this is before the 2 world wars. Some of this was happening in Europe. A lot of it was happening in Switzerland. So some of these pioneers are F.M. Alexander, Moshe Feldenkrais, Mabel Todd, Irmgard Bartinieff, Charlotte Selver, Milton Traeger, Gerda Alexander, and Ida Roth. Okay. And of course, what we have to name, I mentioned it earlier, is that so much of these early pioneers really worked with martial arts, or were influenced by martial arts, were studying yoga and meditation. So, of course, a lot of what was happening in Europe has to be mentioned, that was influenced by the early yoga teachers that came to the West. And of course, we can see the boom, the rise of these Eastern traditions influencing Western meditation, Western contemplative practices, but also Western medicine, starting the 1960s. But there was also already a lot of that happening in the earlier part of the century. Okay. So these were the somatic pioneers, but on the other end of it, there are these dance pioneers who started working somatically, even though they didn't name it like that. So that's François de la Sarthe, Émile Jacques Dalgros, Rudolf von Laban, Isadora Duncan, and Mary Wigman. Yeah. Now, for those of you who know authentic movement, Mary Wigman is really considered to be the great-grandmother, great-great-grandmother of authentic movement, because she really started moving from within. She started expressing, she started dancing barefoot, so did Isadora Duncan, but she was also expressing archetypes without naming it like that. But her witch dance, her famous dance with the mask, is, of course, a dance with the archetypes. So, of course, we have to name Ziggy Jung as sort of one of the most influential psychoanalysis, or sort of the person who also opened up the field for all of the creative arts therapies, really. His focus on mythological aspects, on dream material, and naming and forming some of these concepts that were, constantly working and playing with, which, the shadow, the collective unconscious, individuation processes, animus and anima. Those terms have become so sort of embedded in popular psychology that we often don't know that they actually come from Jung. I'll talk more about Jung when I talk about my archetypes, also my archetype podcast. Okay. And so here we have the pioneers, some of the pioneers in the somatic field and some of the pioneers in the dance field. And now we're looking in like 1960s, 1970s, when these dancers started really exploring the interconnection of those two fields. And some of these pioneers were Elaine Summers, Bonnie Brainbridge Cohen, who of course is still teaching, Emil Conrad with continuum movement, Sandra Farley, Anna Halprin, of course, Joan Skinner, Nancy Topf, Amos Hetz. And then as we go along further into more contemporary, Susan Klein and Barbara Mala, and of course Martha Eddy. And there's many, many more because, as I said, it's been so integrated into our dance awareness that we need to work with somatics. So I talked about some of the goals, some of the objectives. There's many more. We can dive into the details of that when you come to one of my trainings. But if I lay out basically two main approaches in how I like to work with the combination of somatics and dance is one is how to begin with and one how to end with. So oftentimes what I will do at the beginning of the session, I will start lying on the floor. I will ask my participants to lie on the floor, bring their focus in, start being aware of their breath, start being aware of their connection to the earth, releasing tonus, yielding into the floor, sensing their body weight, slowing down. Yeah. And that can go into awareness through movement exercise. That can go into working with the center and some navel radiation. That can go into an exploration of our joints, a warming up session of our joints. And then, so starting with these different entry points that are more somatically focused, and then I will guide people into a solo improvisation. And from then we go into the dance. So this, for me, kind of sets the tone, it sets a focus, it sets an internal referencing that I find to be very important before I actually go and touch somebody else, before I actually go and start sort of orienting myself outwardly, because I feel like if I have my basis inside of me, I will feel more secure, hopefully. I will feel more grounded, hopefully. I will have a better sense of where I am and or have released maybe some of the tensions in my body. So it's just a really good practice to start with the floor, with the breath, and with myself. And maybe this is a specific note, but when I work with contact improvisation, which of course I call also integrative contact improvisation, because those somatic pieces are there for me to create a sense of integration or a sense of integrity also when I go into contact improvisation. So if I've had this practice of attuning to myself first, I will most likely go into contact with somebody else from a different base, from a different sense of awareness, from a different sense of release, and from a different sense of having tuned into myself. I will hopefully then tune into another person with the same amount of care or the same amount of listening quality. Of course, there's many details around that, and sometimes, oftentimes I will teach specific contact improvisation workshops where it is about that combination of somatic practices, body mind centering elements, but also working from specific explorations around specific body parts. For instance, working with our shoulder joints and the different directions that we have in the shoulder joint, not the shoulder joint, but the shoulder girdle, where the shoulder joint is just one aspect of the larger shoulder girdle. which actually then we notice that our shoulders actually start at the base of our spine, yeah, muscularly speaking. So we get a different sort of holistic approach to moving specific body parts and then taking those into specific techniques or specific movement patterns within contact improvisation. So I can work with somatics both in an unspecific way and in a specific way. So by unspecific, I mean we can work with movement qualities, with touch qualities, with perception modi, or with attention to certain aspects of ourselves. That's what I would call unspecific. And then I can also work with specific body parts and take them over into specific movement patterns or specific techniques, both for solo dancing and also contact improvisation or partnering. So these are all the parts that I talk about in terms of beginning with. One of the really wonderful things around working with body work, of course, is this layer of rest, this layer of integration, this layer of receiving touch, nourishing, listening touch. And so sometimes it's just a really beautiful, sorry, something was ringing a bell here that I wasn't prepared for. So, so after you've done, an extended period of time of exploration, of dancing, of exploring both, in a more expressive way, this layer of rest, of receiving touch, of also, I don't like the word passive, but more receptive end of it. So I'm resting and somebody is giving me touch. Can be really integrative, especially also for the longer retreats that I do, like the 5-day retreats, or when I co-teach with Alicia together, we do these 2-week formats. Yeah, it's hard to sustain a level of activity for a long period of time without this layer of rest, and this will really bring in a beautiful regenerative layer. Sorry, I'm gonna have to cut this out. I'm gonna mark this right now. I'm gonna turn off my phone. Here we go. So we're coming back in with the part. So the part of going out, the part of going or ending or an in-between phase is the part that is really helpful also with using somatics, using bodywork sequences, using listening touch, using this quality of resting and receiving different touch qualities and or specific techniques can be really integrative from the times when we're dancing, with more energy, or our attention is also going more out, and it's just also, it's a really good practice to find times to integrate, to slow down, to also let the body process in a way some of these informations without completely collapsing. So oftentimes I will see dancers going full on, dance, 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 and then it stopped. And so what if we dance, 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 and then start integrating and still aligning and still staying aware and staying present in the body, but also in a more receptive way. So entry in between, or exit out. Those are the two main ways, and this applies to improvisational dance, to contact improvisation, but also to authentic movement. So maybe here's a specific note about how I like to teach authentic movement, which I call Authentic Movement Plus. Oftentimes, I will start before even going into an authentic movement round. I will start by doing a Feldenkrais exercise, or I will start by a breathing exercise. I will start with a warm-up. I will start with self-touch. I will start with movement vocabulary that brings us into a deeper attunement into our soma, into our internal awareness, and that when I go into authentic movement, A, I'm warmed up. B, I already have like a life force that's inside of my body that might help me uncover another layer, another depth, another aspect of myself. Now, I know that authentic movement is being taught in many different ways, and that's why I also call it Authentic Movement Plus, because it is quite specific. But of course, I'm a dancer and a body worker, and so this is how I like to approach authentic movement. I find it to be extremely rich. I find it to be extremely supportive, especially for people who don't have so much experience with moving, to have movement vocabulary, to have a sense of breath also. So also when it gets tight sometimes, or when you go and encounter something in authentic movement that is intense and that requires sort of a level of being able to carry yourself through maybe some difficult feelings or some difficult unconscious material that comes up, movement vocabulary, a sense of groundedness or a sense of relationality to the earth, and also working with the breath can really, really help. And it's helpful to offer that to people before and after the actual authentic movement sessions so that when they encounter it in the session, they have access to it. Okay. So the last part, which I've been promised quite a long time at the beginning of the first solo podcast, is I want to talk about the context in which somatics and also applied anatomy is being used. And first I have to say, I would like to talk about the word embodiment because it's so closely related to these differences of how it's being used. So embodiment is a word that has become quite popular as the word somatics. And I feel and think and believe that it's being used in different ways. It's being used in different ways depending on where people are coming from. And I have to say, I am all in favor. I am loving the fact that so much more of psychology, of trauma work, of science, neuroscience is discovering the body. Yay, yay, go for it. It's something that dancers and body workers, of course, that's our home. And we're noticing, so coming from this perspective, what I'm noticing, and many of my colleagues are noticing, is that the word embodiment and the word somatics is being used in a different context. So if I generalize a lot here, but in order to make a distinction, when we're talking about somatics and the process of embodiment that happens through these somatic practices, from the perspective of a body worker, from the perspective of holistic dance, from the perspective of somatic dance practices, there are all these objectives, all these goals that I named earlier. There's an in-depth cellular movement, perceptual, uncovering, an inquiry, a movement practice, a touch practice, not always, but often a touch practice, a connection on deep layers of the body systems, on movement possibilities, on rehabilitation, injury prevention, all of the things that I mentioned earlier. Pre-verbal information, prenatal information, karmic information, cellular memory, all of these layers that we're dealing with, animal body information, that we tune in, we work with, we play with, we express, we integrate. And this is what for us, oftentimes, this word embodiment sort of covers. Now, again, I do not want to be critical. I just want to differentiate here. What I'm noticing is that when the word somatics and embodiment is being used in more psychologically trained settings, that people are, from my perspective, are skimming the surface. Let's just put it this way. They're acknowledging that there is a body when they're doing talk therapy. They're acknowledging that if you're using the breath, you are able to tune into a deeper sense of self and a deeper sense of feeling yourself. People are acknowledging that they're accessing trauma in a different way if they're using and working with physiological aspects of the body. But, and I think this is the difference here, it always comes back to talk therapy, or it always comes back to talk language-based process. And that's a different direction. That's a different direction that we're doing. We're taking the body first, and we are also, taking the language in, or finding the language, or, acknowledging the fact that we are language-based, a language-based species, but the body comes first. And the depth of the body is endless. And there is so much also within these therapies and this somatic movement education that we're offering that is not even acknowledged yet in these other fields. So I hope I made my point clear, and I also hope that it comes across in an appreciative way, because of course sometimes you need talk therapy, and you need somebody to help you also be able to access your trauma through language-based modalities. I'm not saying that that is not important. On the contrary, but these can be complementary. And I think the only criticism that I have is that oftentimes people from these set of modalities kind of think like, hey, we've discovered the big new thing, and we're over here, we're going like, come on, this is what we've been busy with all of our lives and for so many generations now already, and there's so much more. Okay. So somatics, this also applies to the word applied anatomy. I haven't talked about that in a specific way, just mention it here, that I find applied anatomy something that's like a curious approach to anatomy. It's a hands-on approach while moving. Of course, applied anatomy can also mean many different things in a more sort of medicine or scientific context. Yeah. So the somatic field, the somatic dance field is, I've talked about that quite a bit. I think the biggest shift here, or the biggest confusion here, is between what's considered to be somatic movement education and therapy and somatic experiencing. Because somatic experiencing is becoming a very popular approach that has been integrated into many therapeutic settings. And I'll just talk about that briefly, and then I'll talk more about somatic movement therapy. So somatic experiencing was founded by Peter Levine. And Peter Levine has been working, and the form of somatic experiencing is really focused on working with trauma, with situational trauma, with PTSD, has been exceedingly successful in helping people grounding themselves and helping where talk therapy has no longer been able to help, regulating the nervous system, getting people out of freeze states, finding resources, again, connecting language with the body. But somatic experiencing is a method, is a trademark method, and that's what it's called. Yeah. And then we have what we call somatic movement education and therapy. And I would like to read a little bit of how it is defined by ISMETA, because ISMETA is the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. Yeah. And as many of you know, I've been certified as a master somatic movement educator, and my program, the Holistic Dance Teachers Training and Advanced Teachers Training, have been certified as accredited training programs within the larger frame of ISMETA. So if I read a little bit here about the pillars of profession, so ISMETA defines the practices of somatic movement education and therapy as postural and movement observations, experiential anatomy and physiology explorations, movement patterning and repatterning, communication and guidance through touch, verbal clues, and/or demonstration. And again, it is a pool of different methods, a pool of different approaches. And each of these methods help students and clients in some way to increase awareness of the sensations of the moving body, including interoception and proprioception. Focus on the body both as an objective physical process and as a subjective process of lived consciousness. Recognize habitual patterns of perceptual, postural, and movement interaction with the environment. To discover new possibilities for perceptual, postural, and movement interactions with the environment. That's kind of a repeat, sorry. And to enhance the awareness of biological, physiological, social, and ecological aspects of the human experience through movement. So that's maybe on my way out, worth noting that, of course, the somatic practices have an immediate impact on not only our inner ecology, our relational ecology to other people, but then, of course, to a larger ecology of the environment that we live in, the other beings that are with us and around us, the ecosystem that we live in, nature, Gaia, the earth. Because once we start connecting to ourselves and the richness of our lived experience, we become more sensitive and become more aware that we're not alone, that we're interconnected beings, that there is support and resource out there, but that also needs care, that there's a container that we're constantly moving on and in. So again, that we're part of a larger ecosystem. I just want to say I love doing this work. It's hugely inspiring. It's still unfolding in so many ways. It's still pioneering work in so many ways. Um, this decades worth of work is still landing in a collective consciousness. It's still landing in our processes of finding language. And yeah, I hope that this podcast was a little bit helpful in also differentiating the different fields and also the different uses. And I'm super happy if you write me or if you send me your comments and if you share the podcast, of course. Ciao! If you would like to know more about holistic dance and the Holistic Dance Institute, please visit us at our website www.holistic-dance.at. Holistic dance is an invitation to transformation through dance, movement, and touch. It was founded by me, Sabine Parzer, in 2010. It is a mix of different methods, a dynamic cross-method approach from dance pedagogical, dance and body therapeutic, systemic and holistic methods. We offer authentic movement, integrative contact improvisation, somatics and applied anatomy, improvisation, ecosomatics, and many more elements. I offer holistic dance workshops, I offer single sessions, I offer teachers trainings, embodiment trainings, advanced teachers tracks, year groups, and retreats. I would be very happy to see you at one of our events. And if you have any questions, please write me an email.